He begged to be my son's dad, then walked out like we were nothing. I'm Lauren, I'm 33, and yeah, I was a single mom when I met Logan 4 years ago. My son Leo was only 2 then, and his real dad Rich was basically a ghost who showed up maybe twice a year with some cheap toy and thought that made him father of the year. So when I met Logan at my friend's birthday party, and he actually seemed interested in getting to know both me and Leo, I thought maybe I'd finally caught a break. Logan was different from the guys I usually dated. He had his life together, worked steady hours at some warehouse job, and didn't immediately run when I mentioned I had a kid. Most guys hear single mom, and they're out the door faster than you can say child support, but Logan actually stuck around and started coming over to watch movies with us on weekends. He'd bring pizza and let Leo pick what we watched, even though it was always some annoying cartoon. At first I thought it was just him trying to impress me. You know how guys do that fake nice thing when they want something. But weeks turned into months, and he kept showing up, kept being patient with Leo's tantrums, kept helping out without me even asking. I remember thinking this was exactly what I needed. Someone stable who could help me give Leo the father figure he deserved. Rich sure wasn't going to step up and be a real dad, so if Logan wanted to play house, then I was going to let him. It felt good having someone to split the load with. Someone who actually wanted to be there instead of acting like spending time with my kid was some huge favor. Logan would pick Leo up from daycare when I had to work late. He'd make dinner when I was too tired. He'd even do bedtime stories in these silly voices that made Leo laugh until his little face turned red. Between you and me, I started getting used to having that help pretty quick. Like, why wouldn't I take advantage of having someone who actually wanted to step up where Rich failed? I wasn't forcing Logan to do anything. He offered, and I accepted. That's just smart, right? I mean, I'd been doing everything alone for 2 years, and suddenly, here's this guy who wants to make my life easier. Of course I'm going to let him. Leo started calling him daddy after about 6 months. And honestly, it melted my heart seeing my baby finally have someone consistent who showed up for him. Logan got all weird about it at first. Said maybe Leo should call him by his name, but I told him not to overthink it. Kids need stability, and if Leo saw him as a father figure, then that was beautiful. Logan eventually relaxed about it and started embracing the role more. He'd take Leo to the park on Saturday mornings while I slept in, which was honestly amazing because Saturday morning cartoons at 7 a.m. were killing me. He'd help with homework, even though Leo was barely old enough for real homework, just those little coloring sheets from preschool. But Logan would sit there and color with him like it was the most important thing in the world. I have to admit it was nice finally having a partner who understood that dating me meant accepting my whole package. Rich never got that. He thought he could just pop in and out of Leo's life whenever it was convenient for him. But Logan seemed to understand from day one that if he wanted to be with me, Leo came with the deal. And honestly, he seemed happy about it most of the time. He'd brag to his friends about Leo learning new words or mastering some new skill on the playground. It was cute how proud he got over stuff that wasn't even really his accomplishment, but whatever made him happy. The thing is, I never asked him to take on the dad role. He just kind of fell into it naturally. And once he was in it, it would have been cruel to pull Leo away from that stability, just because I was having doubts about our relationship sometimes. Logan became Leo's whole world pretty fast, and what kind of mother would I be if I took that away from my son just because Logan and I weren't perfect together? So, yeah, I let it continue even when things between us got complicated because my priority had to be what was best for Leo. And what was best for Leo was having a consistent male figure who showed up every day and treated him like his own kid. The routine we fell into was honestly pretty sweet for a while there. Logan would come over after work most days, and we'd have dinner together like some kind of normal family. He'd help Leo with his bath time while I cleaned up the kitchen, then we'd all watch TV together until Leo's bedtime. Logan got really good at the whole bedtime routine. He'd read 3 stories, get Leo a cup of water, and stay until he fell asleep because Leo went through this phase where he was scared of monsters under his bed. I loved having that time to myself in the evenings to catch up on my shows or scroll through Facebook without constantly being interrupted by mommy this and mommy that. It was the first time since Leo was born that I felt like I could actually breathe and be myself instead of just being somebody's mom every second of the day. Logan started keeping clothes at my apartment, and eventually just kind of moved in without us ever really discussing it officially. His lease was up anyway, and he was basically living there already, so it made financial sense. Plus, Leo loved having him there all the time. He'd wake up and run to find Logan in the kitchen making breakfast, chattering away about whatever dream he'd had or what he wanted to do that day. Logan was naturally good with kids in a way that Rich never was and never would be. Rich always looked uncomfortable when he had to actually interact with Leo for more than 10 minutes, but Logan seemed to genuinely enjoy all the kid stuff that most guys find annoying. He'd play cars on the floor for hours, build elaborate block towers just so Leo could knock them down, and he never once complained about having to watch the same cartoon movie 50 times in a row. I started working more hours at the store since I knew Leo was in good hands with Logan. My manager had been wanting to promote me to supervisor for months, but I couldn't take on the extra responsibilities when I was handling everything alone. But with Logan covering school pickup and dinner and homework help, I could finally focus on advancing my career. The extra money was nice too. I could actually buy Leo name brand clothes instead of always shopping clearance racks and hand-me-downs. Logan never made me feel bad about not contributing equally to household expenses either. He knew my situation was different since I had a kid to think about, and his job paid better than mine anyway. He'd handle the rent and utilities while I covered groceries and Leo stuff, which seemed fair enough. I mean, childcare is expensive, and if Logan was basically providing free babysitting, then the least he could do was cover his share of the bills. On weekends, we'd do family stuff, go to the zoo or the children's museum, or just hang out at the park while Leo burned off energy on the playground. I'd bring a book and actually get to read while Logan pushed Leo on the swings, or played catch with him. Other moms would comment on how lucky I was to have such a hands-on partner, and honestly, they were right. Logan never acted like watching his own kid was doing me some huge favor the way Rich used to. He just stepped up and handled whatever needed handling without making a big production about it. I got comfortable with that dynamic pretty quickly. Maybe too comfortable if I'm being honest. But when someone offers to make your life easier, you don't say no just to prove some point about independence. I'd been independent for 2 years, and it was exhausting. Having Logan around meant I could actually enjoy being a mom instead of just surviving it. Leo was happier, too, with the consistency of having Logan there every day. No more asking when Daddy was coming to visit or why other kids' dads who lived with us and he didn't. Logan filled that gap and, honestly, did a better job at it than Rich ever had even when we were together. So, yeah, I let myself get used to having that support system because it was working for all of us. But then things started getting weird, and I swear it came out of nowhere. Logan started working overtime constantly and claiming he was too tired to help with bedtime routines or weekend activities with Leo. He'd come home and just crash on the couch instead of engaging with us like he used to. When I'd ask what was wrong, he'd just say work was stressful and brush me off like my concerns didn't matter. I started noticing he was being short with Leo, too. Getting impatient when Leo wanted to show him drawings from school or asked him to play cars. It's like he forgot that being part of our family meant actually participating, not just existing in the same space. I tried talking to him about it multiple times, but he'd always turn it around on me somehow. He'd say I was being too demanding or that he needed some space to decompress after work. But hello, I work, too, and I don't get to come home and ignore my responsibilities just because I'm tired. Leo started asking why Logan didn't want to play anymore, and I had to make excuses for behavior I didn't even understand myself. Then Logan started making comments about needing guy time and wanting to hang out with his friends more often, which was fine in theory. But in practice, it meant leaving me to handle everything alone on his nights out. I've been looking forward to our weekend family time all week, and suddenly he's bailing to go drink beer with his buddies like he's still some single guy with no obligations. When I pointed out that I never got girls' nights because someone had to watch Leo, he'd act like I was being unreasonable for expecting him to prioritize us. He started questioning every little thing I did. Why I needed to get my nails done, why I wanted to go out with my girlfriends once in a while. Why I bought Leo new shoes when his old ones still fit. It felt like he was keeping score of every dollar I spent, while conveniently forgetting that I'd been handling all of Leo's expenses on my own for years before he came along. The worst part was how he started acting like spending time with Leo was some huge burden instead of just normal family life. He'd sigh dramatically when Leo asked for help with something, or make comments about needing peace and quiet when Leo was just being a normal 6-year-old. I started feeling like I had to apologize for my own son existing in his own home. Logan would get annoyed if Leo interrupted his TV shows or asked too many questions during dinner. It's like he forgot that kids don't come with volume controls, and that being part of a family means dealing with the chaos that comes with it. I tried explaining that Leo was just excited to have a dad figure who actually paid attention to him, but Logan acted like that was somehow my fault for letting Leo get attached, which was rich coming from the guy who encouraged the attachment in the first place by playing daddy when it was convenient for him. When I bring up how his attitude was affecting Leo, Logan would accuse me of using my son to manipulate him, but I wasn't manipulating anything. I was pointing out that his behavior was hurting a little kid who didn't deserve to feel rejected by another father figure. Leo had already been abandoned by one dad, and now Logan was pulling away too, but somehow I was the bad guy for calling it out. I started walking on eggshells, trying not to set Logan off, making sure Leo was extra quiet when Logan was home, handling more of the parenting duties myself so Logan wouldn't have to be bothered, but nothing I did seemed to make him happy anymore, and I was getting frustrated with constantly having to manage his moods on top of everything else. Between you and me, I started wondering if this was just who Logan really was, and the first 3 years had been an act to reel me in. Everything came to a head on a Tuesday night that I'll never forget as long as I live. I'd made plans to go out with my girlfriend Sarah for her birthday dinner. Nothing crazy, just dinner and maybe one drink after. I'd told Logan about it weeks in advance, and he'd said it was fine, that he'd handle bedtime with Leo. But that morning he suddenly announced he'd picked up an extra shift and wouldn't be home until after 9. Sarah had already made reservations and taken time off work, so I asked if he could maybe skip the overtime, just this once since I rarely asked for anything. That's when he completely lost it and started yelling about how I always expected him to drop everything for my plans, but never considered what he might want to do, which was completely unfair because I'd given him weeks of notice, and he was the one changing plans at the last minute. I tried explaining that Sarah had already arranged everything, and it would be rude to cancel, but Logan started going off about how I treated him like a free babysitter instead of a partner. He said I never asked what he wanted, just assumed he'd be available whenever I needed him to watch Leo. I reminded him that Leo wasn't just some random kid I was dumping on him. He'd been acting like Leo's father for 4 years, and fathers don't get to clock out when it's inconvenient. That's when he said the thing that I still can't believe came out of his mouth. He looked me right in the eye and said, "Maybe you should have married your son's real dad instead of using me as a replacement." I felt like he'd punch me in the stomach because that was the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to me. Rich had abandoned us when Leo was barely walking, and Logan knew the whole story about how he just disappeared when things got real. For him to throw that in my face after everything we'd built together was just vicious and uncalled for. I started crying because I couldn't believe this was the same man who used to brag about Leo calling him daddy, who'd promised to always be there for both of us. He'd made himself part of our family, and now he was acting like we'd forced him into it somehow. I tried to explain that I'd never asked him to be Leo's father, that he'd chosen that role himself, but he just kept going. He said he was tired of being taken for granted and never having his needs considered, which was ridiculous because I'd been bending over backwards trying to make him happy. He complained about never having any time for himself anymore, conveniently forgetting that I hadn't had time for myself in 6 years, because that's what being a parent means. Then he had the nerve to say I'd trapped him in a situation he never really wanted, like I'd somehow deceived him about having a child, when Leo was literally there the night we met. I couldn't stop crying, because it felt like our entire relationship had been a lie if this was how he really felt about my son. Logan just stood there watching me fall apart without even trying to comfort me or take back what he'd said. After 4 years together, after everything we'd been through, he could just watch me cry and not feel anything. That's when I knew something had fundamentally changed between us, and I wasn't sure we could come back from it. The next few weeks were absolute torture because Logan basically shut down completely after our fight. He'd come home from work and go straight to his computer or just lie on the couch scrolling his phone without acknowledging me or Leo. When Leo would try to show him schoolwork or ask him to play, Logan would barely look up and mumble something about being busy. I watched my 6-year-old's face fall every single time, and it broke my heart because Leo didn't understand why his daddy suddenly didn't want anything to do with him. I tried multiple times to get Logan to talk about what happened, to work through whatever issues he was having, but he'd just shrug and say everything was fine when it obviously wasn't. He started staying at work later and later, sometimes not coming home until after Leo was already asleep, which felt like he was deliberately avoiding having to interact with us. On weekends, he'd disappear for hours claiming he needed to run errands, but I knew he was just hiding from his responsibilities. I'd text asking when he'd be back and get one-word responses or no response at all, like I was bothering him by wondering where my 11 boyfriend was. The worst part was how he'd act completely normal when other people were around but treat us like strangers the moment we were alone. When my mom came to visit, Logan was all smiles and charm, playing with Leo and acting like the perfect family man. But the second she left, he went right back to the silent treatment and emotional withdrawal. I started feeling crazy because I'd try to bring up his behavior, and he'd act like I was imagining things or being overly dramatic. He'd say I was reading too much into normal tiredness from work, but this wasn't tiredness. This was deliberate punishment for a fight he'd started. I even suggested we try counseling to work through our communication issues, but Logan said we didn't need outside help, and I was making our problems bigger than they actually were. Meanwhile, Leo kept asking why Logan didn't want to read stories anymore or help him with his Lego sets, and I had to keep making excuses for behavior I couldn't explain myself. I tried giving Logan space, thinking maybe he just needed time to process, but the space turned into weeks of living like roommates who barely spoke to each other. I'd cook dinner, and he'd eat in silence, then disappear back to his computer. I'd try making conversation about our days and get grunts or one-word answers like I was interviewing a hostile witness. At night, he'd roll over with his back to me and pretend to be asleep when I tried to talk about anything relationship-related. I started sleeping on the couch some nights because the tension in our bedroom was suffocating and I couldn't handle lying there, feeling rejected and confused. Part of me wondered if he was seeing someone else because the complete personality change was so extreme. But he never went anywhere except work and his occasional guys' nights that had become more frequent. I even checked his phone one night when he was in the shower, which I'm not proud of, but I was desperate to understand what was happening to us. There was nothing suspicious, just normal work texts and conversations with his friends about sports and random guy stuff. So, I was left trying to figure out how we'd gone from being a happy family to barely tolerating each other's existence in the span of one argument. Every day, I hoped Logan would snap out of whatever funk he was in and go back to being the man I'd fallen in love with, but instead he seemed to be pulling further and further away from both me and Leo. Then one Thursday morning I woke up and Logan was just gone. Not like gone to work early, actually gone. His clothes were missing from the closet, his toiletries were gone from the bathroom, and there was no note, no explanation. Nothing. I called his job and they said he'd requested time off but wouldn't say anything else. I texted and called his phone, but everything went straight to voicemail that was suddenly full. I drove by his old apartment building, thinking maybe he'd gone back there, but the landlord said no one by his name lived there anymore. It was like he'd just vanished into thin air after 4 years of being the center of our daily routine. Leo kept asking where Logan was and when he was coming home, and I had no idea what to tell him, because I honestly didn't know. I made up some story about Logan having to go help his family with something, but Leo's not stupid. He knew something was wrong. The abandonment hit Leo hard because this was exactly what had happened with Rich, except this time he was old enough to really understand what it meant when someone just disappeared. He started having nightmares and wetting the bed again, behaviors we'd worked past years ago. I had to take time off work to deal with his emotional regression and the sudden complete upheaval of our lives. Everything we'd built as a family was just gone overnight, and I was back to being a single mom trying to explain to my son why another father figure had decided we weren't worth sticking around for. About 2 weeks after Logan disappeared, Rich suddenly started calling and texting saying he wanted to be more involved in Leo's life. Apparently, he'd gotten his act together somewhat and thought now was a good time to play daddy, which felt like the universe's idea of a sick joke. I told him he couldn't just waltz back in after years of basically ignoring his son, but Rich kept pushing and eventually mentioned lawyers and custody rights. The timing felt suspicious, like maybe he'd heard somehow that Logan was out of the picture and saw an opportunity to swoop in. Leo was confused and heard about Logan leaving, and now here was his biological father trying to insert himself back into our lives when everything was already chaos. I started hearing things from mutual friends about Logan, that he'd been telling people he felt trapped and needed to figure out his life without the pressure of instant fatherhood. Apparently, he'd been complaining to his buddies for months about feeling like he'd gotten in over his head too fast, which was news to me since he'd been the one pushing for more family time in the beginning. Some of my friends started looking at me differently too, like maybe I'd been too demanding or pushed too hard for commitment. Even my own mother made comments about how maybe I should have been more independent instead of relying on Logan so much for help with Leo. Everyone seemed to have opinions about what I'd done wrong, but nobody wanted to acknowledge that Logan was the one who'd made promises he couldn't keep. Within 2 months of Logan leaving, my whole support system had crumbled, and I was more alone than I'd been even before we got together. Rich was threatening court action if I didn't agree to regular visitation, work was getting impatient with my emergency time off, and Leo was struggling in school because his whole world had been turned upside down. I realized that everything I'd thought was stable and permanent had been built on Logan's willingness to play house. And the moment he changed his mind about wanting that life, it all disappeared. The worst part was that I never got any real explanation or closure, just abandonment and everyone else's judgment about how I must have driven him away somehow. But here's the thing that really gets me. Months later, I found out through Sarah that Logan had started dating some 25-year-old with no kids who worked at his company. Apparently, they'd been talking for a while before he left, which explained the sudden personality change and emotional withdrawal. So all that garbage about needing space and feeling trapped was just his way of avoiding the truth that he'd found someone easier, someone without baggage or complications. I saw them together once at the grocery store, and she was everything I'm not: young, skinny, no stretch marks or exhaustion lines, probably never had to choose between buying herself new clothes or her kid new shoes. She was giggling at everything he said like he was the funniest man alive, hanging on his arm like some lovesick teenager. And Logan looked happier than I'd seen him in months, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders now that he didn't have to pretend to care about someone else's kid anymore. The girl didn't even notice me standing there, but Logan saw me and just looked right through me like I was a stranger, like we hadn't spent 4 years building a life together. That's when I realized he'd probably been planning his exit for way longer than I thought, just waiting for the right opportunity and the right replacement to come along. Rich ended up getting partial custody after threatening me with expensive legal battles I couldn't afford. So now Leo spends every other weekend with a father who barely knows him but suddenly wants to play daddy when it's convenient. Logan never once reached out to check on Leo or see how he was handling the abandonment, which told me everything I needed to know about how much all those years really meant to him. Everyone keeps telling me I'm better off without someone who could walk away so easily, but that doesn't help when I'm working double shifts to afford the same apartment that used to feel manageable with 2 incomes. It doesn't help when Leo asks why people always leave us, or when I have to explain that sometimes adults make promises they don't really mean. I gave Logan 4 years of my life, let him into my family, trusted him with my son's heart, and he threw it all away for some girl who probably doesn't even know his middle name yet. But somehow, I'm the one everyone thinks should have seen it coming. Like I was supposed to predict that the man who begged me to let him be Leo's father would eventually decide fatherhood was too hard when a better option presented itself. Now I'm back where I started, except older, more tired, and with a kid who's learned that the men who claim to love us always find reasons to leave eventually. So, yeah, maybe I should have married Leo's real dad, like Logan said, but at least then I would have known from the start that I was dealing with someone unreliable instead of wasting years believing in someone who was just playing house until something better came along.